I very much admire and love the Anglican Church, but I can't really get round the idea of God. But that's just to put myself plainly where I am, not very plainly, but where I am. The second of my starting points is that politically we are in this country extremely fortunate. Whatever our opinion of any particular government is, the fact is that Parliament is elected and Parliament makes the laws, and the rule of law is something that is absolutely ingrained in this country. And the position that I want to defend is that the worst kind of regime that one can possibly live in is a theocracy, where laws are made by a priesthood, and the priesthood is obviously that group of people who think that believe that they have direct access to God's laws, which other people don't have, and therefore they can not only demand that the people they govern believe or profess to believe the faith that the priesthood, professes, but they can arbitrarily invent laws with the claim that these laws come directly either from God or from a sacred text, which is the Word of God. Now, I consider that this is the worst possible imaginable kind of government under which to live, because it's arbitrary and it's powerful, all-powerful, and there is no gainsaying it. So I want really, first of all, that you should reflect on our good fortune in being a democracy, however flawed, living under the rule of law, however flawed, and always being able, provided we've got enough money these days, to defend ourselves in court if we're wrongly accused or wrongly imprisoned or in any other way unjustly treated. That is the ideal under which we live. I know it doesn't always work, but at least we do all agree that the rule of law is best, and the rule of law is a law for everyone. Everyone is able to be acquainted with the law and to claim a fair trial under the law. So that is my strong belief. And I think that although in this country we are miles from being a theocracy, there are some elements among the religious members of the community who somehow think that religion has a special place in politics, deserves special hearing. And it's that belief that I want to challenge. I think I'm a great believer in there being an established church. It's not that I'm attacking at all. I think the established church is immensely valuable to us because it does enable us to know what religion, the Christian religion generally stands for, and its voice is able to be heard, and able to be heard even in Parliament with the bishop's bench in the House of Lords. And I have no desire to attack the existence of the bishop's bench at all. I think it's very proper that the established church should have a voice in Parliament. And I think as long as the Church of England is established, and is the established church, so long the voice of the bishops ought to be heard, from the bishop's bench. So I'm certainly not attacking that, though many people do. I think the last Archbishop of Canterbury, I usually couldn't understand anything that he said, whether in prose or verse, but he did say one thing that I could understand, which was that when Christians or members of any other faith spoke in Parliament, they were of course entitled to express their views, and of course entitled to say that their views arose out of their faith. But they must make clear where it was that they were coming from. And I think that is absolutely right. I don't know whether any of you, probably many of you, saw a letter to the press from the Archbishop of Canterbury and many other bishops and clerics on the subject of assisted dying, when this was an issue that came up before the House of Commons last September. It was a very long and well-argued letter, but the curious thing about it was that, apart from right at the beginning saying that Christianity had a very good record of compassion and good works, religion wasn't mentioned in the letter at all after that. All the arguments against assisted dying for those who are terminally ill were secular arguments based on the difficulty of avoiding abuse, providing enough safeguards, getting the medical profession to agree, and so on. Purely secular arguments. And I think I was entertained by that, actually, because it's obvious that they, the bishops, understood that actually, if they'd argued from a theological or doctrinal point of view, or derived their arguments from sacred text, they would have appealed only to people who already shared their faith, and it would say nothing whatever to people who did not share their faith. So therefore they abandoned those arguments as they had them and took to the secular arguments. But my point about it was this: if they were relying entirely on secular arguments, what particular claim had they got, the bishops, to be heard more than other people? Because other people who relied on secular arguments, many of them could use arguments of a secular kind to defend assisted dying for the terminally ill, and have done so. So there was no particular reason why, there being the spokespeople of religion, for them particularly to carry weight. And this, I think, illustrates my point. Of course, people of religious faith can express political views in Parliament and outside it. Of course, they can derive these views from the tenets of their faith, but they have no particular reason to be listened to rather than other people, because other people have strongly political views without any religious backing at all, and their claim to be heard is just as great. I think there is a very interesting point here that probably has become more obvious in the last few decades, and that is the number of cases that have to be debated in Parliament and in the press and in public in general that are moral arguments. If you think back to perhaps the first of these obvious moral legislative arguments, it's probably the legalization of abortion, the legalization of homosexuality, all of which happened under the guidance of Roy Jenkins when he was Home Secretary. And the manifest fact there was that legislation had to be enacted therefore in Parliament, in due process of introducing such laws, but the arguments were entirely moral arguments. And I think the days when judges, for example, could say, this is not a court of morals, have really gone. Almost all human rights cases, for example, are moral issues which somebody may claim that their rights have been violated, and this is really to say that they have been treated in a way that nobody morally ought to be treated. So the relation between morals, politics and the law is, I believe, much, much closer than it used to be, and partly because of the human rights law, and it's much, much closer than most people realize. Therefore, the question is bound to arise whether religion, theology, gives people who are religious a special claim to be heard on moral issues. I think this is really at the center of what I want us to discuss. And my contention is that they are certainly entitled to say, my religion teaches, and then go on to propound the moral proposition that they want to put forward. But they're not entitled, I think, to claim superior moral knowledge or understanding or insight over that of other people who don't profess any religion. And this, because of the close relation between moral issues and political issues, this is really what I want us to discuss. Does the adoption of a faith, any faith, give you a special moral insight, right to pontificate on moral issues, to be heard more than other people are heard? And one of the regrettable things about the presence of the bishops in the House of Lords is that because of the long connection in people's minds between religion and morality, the bishops do get listened to more perhaps than sometimes they deserve to. Their arguments are often just the same arguments as other people's arguments, but because of their role as the spokespeople of religion, they are heard when sometimes other voices are not heard. Indeed, there's a convention in the House of Lords that if a bishop rises to speak, whoever else has risen to speak sits down and the bishop gets priority. I don't object to that, but what I do object to is the supposition that because it's a bishop speaking, he ought to be followed more than the secular moralists who speak are followed. So that, I think, is what we need to discuss. And it may well turn into a discussion of the connections between religion and morality. But I go back to the very beginning, and then I'll sit down. I think we must bear in mind that far though we are from having a theocracy, much as we prize our democracy, it is absolutely essential that we hold on to our democracy, that we don't ever allow ourselves to turn into a theocratic or even a approximately theocratic state. And we haven't to look far to see the real evil that the profession of a faith is enough to give people authority, and that laws can be made, overthrown, overlooked, disregarded in the name of religion. we really not to look very far at all to see what an appalling evil that is. So that's all I want to say. I want other people now to challenge me, perhaps. Thank you.